Oh my god, are you fucking kidding me?
Leaving on that fucking nigga shit. Take a nigga bitch and then I pass her to the click. I say, see me, I don't got no time for no bitch. I just get her for the bros, I'm just worried about them chips. I'm a shot call, little nigga, I'ma stay wild. Hot nigga, I belong in a door cow. Shot call, little nigga, I'ma stay wild. Hot nigga, I belong in a door cow.
Drop top. Eva. Knievel. They told me stop buying all these fancy cars. They told me please take all your diamonds off. I'm getting too rich to fly commercial flights. They wanna lock me up like Suge Knight. I know that bitch want me to go for that. But I'm too rich to put my dick in that. Hit that bitch way back, I gave her back. They know my drip, you know I'm staying fast.
I'm a CEO, I keep it cordial with an artist. I just don't politic. These women been giving me compliments. Focus, I can't acknowledge this. Astonishment. Look at how the game transform overnight. Feel like I was just getting rid of my rights. Look at how the ice hit none of them lights. Married to the game, we ain't doing no rights. All gray sweats with the white G knife. Too much change, got too much change. Come to think about it, I was looking at life. Stack and bitch, nigga, don't just rap. Talking about damn, nigga can't do that. Fetch me the keys, I mean remote. Call got a button, I'm about to float. I'm organized, looking organized, cause the front of the house is like a parking lot. Take off the shirt, check out the work. Buy the scribble like a marker line. Bandana Louis, no vest and a fully. Buying dogs, I'm investing in bullets. I came from there, I perfected my jugging. Diamond teeth, got a watch full of boogers. Got a chef vegetarian cooking. Cameraman, get professional footage.
They told me stop buying all these fancy cars. They told me please take all your diamonds off. I'm getting too rich to fly commercial flights. They wanna lock me up like Suge Knight. I know that bitch want me to go for that. But I'm too rich to put my dick in that. Hit that bitch way back, I gave her back. They let my drip, you know I'm staying fast. The world's most hateable, currently unavailable. Solo roof, I'm hateable. Pull a watch what the haters do. Gucci's antisocial, bipolar, he's unrelatable. Heard he wrote a novel, got labels, but you can't label him. Independent labels, they model him and they study him. Good rich lingo, he model, but he not studying them. Northern people come around, he flex, start talking southern now. Moving like the governor, fuck it, bitch, I'm the governor. I'm the new Puffy, fuck it, the new 50. I'm the new baby, fuck it, the new Jimmy. Big rock frigid, fucking up hoes vision. Coupe, no ceiling, ceiling is gone miss. They told me stop buying all these fancy cars. They told me please take all your diamonds off. I'm getting too rich to fly commercial flights. They wanna lock me up like Suge Knight. I know that bitch want me to go for that. But I'm too rich to put my dick in that. Hit that bitch way back, I gave her back. They let my drip, you know I'm staying fast. California, New York. Shot down, know how I get down. MIA, ATL, what's up? Houston, Frisco, Detroit, get money just like they know. Yeah.